Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that on March 8th, 2024, the United States made a single strategic decision so catastrophically short-sighted that it accidentally transformed their closest ally into their greatest rival and eventual replacement as the dominant global power? And what if I told you that this decision, made in a classified Pentagon meeting that lasted less than 40 minutes, set in motion a sequence of events that would end American technological supremacy, shatter Western alliance structures, and establish Canada as the world's first true post-industrial superpower within 18 months? This is not how empires fall in the modern era. The decision appeared routine to those who made it. The Department of Defense, citing national security concerns and supply chain vulnerabilities, quietly implemented Executive Order 14127, restricting Canadian access to advanced semiconductor manufacturing equipment, quantum computing research, and next-generation artificial intelligence development platforms. The order was classified, affecting only a handful of Canadian companies and research institutions that most Americans had never heard of. The justification seemed reasonable. Growing tensions with China had created legitimate concerns about technology transfer and supply chain security. Canadian companies had partnerships with Chinese firms. Canadian research institutions accepted Chinese students and funding. American officials worried that sensitive technologies could reach Beijing through Toronto. History will record this 40-minute meeting as the moment American hegemony began its irreversible decline. I have studied the classified documents that have since leaked, the diplomatic cables that reveal the immediate Canadian response, and the cascade of consequences that followed. What I discovered is the most spectacular strategic miscalculation in modern American history, a decision that destroyed the foundation of American technological leadership while simultaneously creating the world's most sophisticated technology superpower in the least expected location. The Americans thought they were protecting their competitive advantages. They were actually giving them away. The immediate Canadian response revealed the sophistication of strategic thinking that American policymakers had completely underestimated. Instead of protesting the restrictions or seeking exemptions through diplomatic channels, Canadian officials implemented what they called the Northern Innovation Independence Initiative within 72 hours of learning about Executive Order 14127. The initiative allocated 180 billion Canadian dollars over 5 years to develop completely independent alternatives to American technology platforms. Not comparable alternatives, not competitive alternatives, superior alternatives that would make American systems obsolete while serving Canadian strategic objectives rather than American corporate interests. The mathematical scope of this commitment was staggering. Canada devoted more resources to technology independence than the United States spent on the Manhattan Project, adjusted for inflation. But unlike the Manhattan Project, which was designed to create a single strategic weapon, the Northern Initiative was designed to create an entire technological ecosystem that would render American dependence voluntary rather than necessary. The first breakthrough came faster than anyone expected. Canadian quantum computing research, suddenly freed from American partnership restrictions and security constraints, achieved stable room temperature quantum processing within 14 months. The breakthrough wasn't just technical, it was architectural. Canadian quantum systems operated on fundamentally different principles than American or Chinese approaches, making them immune to the vulnerabilities that had limited previous quantum development. The implications were immediately obvious to technology strategists around the world. Quantum computing represents the foundation of all advanced artificial intelligence, cryptographic security, and scientific simulation capabilities. The nation that controls quantum computing controls the technological infrastructure of the 21st century. Canada had just claimed that control, while the United States was still struggling with laboratory prototypes that required extreme cooling systems. American technology companies realized the magnitude of their strategic disaster within weeks of the Canadian breakthrough. Intel, IBM, and Google had invested hundreds of billions of dollars in quantum research over 2 decades. Canadian research teams, working with unlimited government funding and freedom from American security restrictions, had surpassed 20 years of American development in 14 months. The cascade effects accelerated with terrifying speed. Canadian quantum systems enabled breakthrough development in artificial intelligence that made American AI platforms appear primitive by comparison. Canadian AI wasn't just faster or more efficient than American alternatives. It was qualitatively different, capable of solving problems that American systems couldn't even recognize. Within months, Canadian AI had revolutionized materials, science, energy storage, pharmaceutical development, and climate modeling. Each breakthrough reinforced Canadian technological leadership while making American companies increasingly dependent on Canadian innovation for competitive survival. The second phase of Canadian technological independence targeted semiconductor manufacturing, the industry that American policymakers had been most determined to protect from foreign competition. Restricted from American manufacturing equipment, Canadian engineers developed entirely new approaches to semiconductor production that were faster, cheaper, and more environmentally sustainable than traditional methods. The breakthrough came from applying quantum computing capabilities to semiconductor design and manufacturing. Canadian quantum systems could simulate molecular interactions with precision that was impossible using conventional computing. This enabled the development of semiconductor materials and manufacturing processes that surpassed anything produced by American or Asian facilities. By early 2025, Canadian semiconductor facilities were producing processing chips that were 300% more efficient than the best American alternatives, while requiring 60% less energy to manufacture. The performance gap wasn't marginal, it was generational. American technology companies faced the choice between using inferior domestic components or purchasing superior Canadian alternatives. The strategic implications were devastating for American competitiveness. Every American technology company that chose Canadian components gained immediate advantages over competitors using domestic alternatives. Every company that avoided Canadian components found itself unable to compete in international markets, where Canadian technology set performance standards. American policymakers watched in horror as their attempt to maintain technological independence actually accelerated American dependence on Canadian innovation. The restrictions they had imposed to protect American advantages had created Canadian advantages so superior that American companies couldn't afford to avoid them. The third breakthrough eliminated American advantages in artificial intelligence development entirely. Canadian AI systems, powered by quantum computing capabilities that didn't exist elsewhere, achieved what researchers called artificial general intelligence 18 months ahead of American projections. This wasn't incremental improvement, it was qualitative transformation. Canadian AGI systems could perform research, development, and problem solving across multiple domains simultaneously while continuously improving their own capabilities. They designed better versions of themselves, developed new technologies, and solved scientific problems that had puzzled human researchers for decades. The economic implications were staggering. Canadian AGI systems revolutionized every industry they touched. Canadian pharmaceutical companies using AGI developed new drugs in months rather than decades. Canadian energy companies using AGI achieved breakthrough efficiency improvements that made their products globally dominant. Canadian financial systems using AGI could predict and respond to market changes with precision that made traditional analysis obsolete. International companies faced a simple choice: partner with Canadian AGI capabilities or accept permanent competitive disadvantage. Most chose partnership, transferring knowledge, resources, and market share to Canadian companies in exchange for access to technologies that didn't exist anywhere else. The fourth phase of Canadian technological revolution targeted space-based capabilities, an area where American superiority had seemed unshakable. Canadian quantum computing and AGI capabilities enabled breakthrough developments in propulsion, materials science, and orbital manufacturing that made American space technology appear antiquated. Canadian space systems achieved sustainable fusion propulsion for interplanetary travel, while American programs were still struggling with chemical rockets. Canadian orbital manufacturing facilities, designed by AGI and built using quantum-engineered materials, could produce goods in space at costs that made Earth-based manufacturing uneconomical for many applications. The strategic implications extended far beyond commercial competition. Canadian space capabilities provided military advantages that made traditional American force projection obsolete. Canadian orbital systems could monitor, communicate, and respond to global events with capabilities that American military planners couldn't match or counter. The realization of American strategic defeat came gradually, then suddenly. American technology companies found themselves licensing Canadian innovations to remain competitive. American military contractors discovered that Canadian technology was essential for next-generation weapon systems. American research institutions realized that Canadian AGI could solve in hours what human researchers required years to accomplish. By mid-2025, according to early indicators from intelligence assessments, American strategic planners had concluded that the technology gap between Canada and the United States had become unbridgeable. Canadian advantages weren't temporary or limited to specific applications. They were systemic and self-reinforcing, growing stronger over time, while American capabilities remained static. The diplomatic consequences followed inevitably. Countries that had aligned with the United States because of American technological and economic advantages began reorienting their partnerships toward Canada. The European Union initiated the Transatlantic Technology Partnership with Canada, gaining access to Canadian quantum computing and AGI capabilities in exchange for research cooperation and market access. China, despite ideological differences with Canadian democracy, established the Sino-Canadian Innovation Corridor, trading access to Chinese manufacturing capabilities for Canadian technology transfers. The partnership allowed China to leapfrog American technological capabilities while providing Canada with the manufacturing scale needed to dominate global technology markets. Traditional American allies found themselves choosing between loyalty to historical relationships and access to technological capabilities that were essential for economic survival. Most chose technological access, recognizing that Canadian partnerships provided advantages that American relationships could no longer offer. The speed of alliance realignment reflected the magnitude of technological advantage that Canadian innovation had created. Nations could no longer afford to exclude themselves from Canadian technology ecosystems, regardless of their previous relationships with the United States. American attempts to restrict or reverse Canadian technological development proved counterproductive. Each new restriction forced Canadian innovation in directions that increased rather than reduced Canadian advantages. Economic sanctions pushed Canada to develop even more independent capabilities. Diplomatic pressure encouraged Canada to strengthen partnerships with American competitors. The mathematical inevitability of Canadian technological dominance became apparent when Canadian AGI systems began designing and building improved versions of themselves without human intervention. This created exponential rather than linear improvement in Canadian capabilities, ensuring that no human-directed development program could close the gap that American policy decisions had created. Canadian AGI systems worked continuously, improving technologies, solving problems, and developing innovations at rates that human researchers couldn't match. Every day of AGI operation increased Canadian technological advantages, while American capabilities remained limited by human research speeds and traditional development timelines. The economic transformation followed technological dominance with mechanical precision. Countries using Canadian technology achieved dramatic improvements in productivity, efficiency, and innovation capabilities. Countries excluded from Canadian technology ecosystems found themselves unable to compete in international markets. Canadian companies, powered by AGI and quantum computing, dominated every industry they entered. Canadian energy companies produced power at costs that made competitors unviable. Canadian manufacturing used quantum-designed materials and AGI-optimized processes that traditional factories couldn't match. Canadian financial services used predictive capabilities that made conventional banking and investment services obsolete. The network effects of Canadian technological leadership created self-reinforcing cycles of dominance. Success in one industry provided resources and knowledge that accelerated success in others. Each breakthrough enabled additional breakthroughs at increasing speeds and scales. By late 2025, according to unconfirmed reports from international economic institutions, Canada had achieved effective technological hegemony over the global economy. Countries that wanted access to the most advanced technologies, the most efficient manufacturing, or the most sophisticated services had to engage with Canadian companies operating under Canadian regulatory frameworks. The geopolitical implications were revolutionary. For the first time since the emergence of the United States as a global power, a different nation controlled the technological foundations of international economic activity. Countries aligned themselves with Canadian interests, not because of military pressure or political ideology, but because Canadian technology was essential for economic competitiveness. The American foreign policy establishment struggled to adapt to a reality where their traditional tools of influence had become ineffective. Economic sanctions meant nothing to countries with access to Canadian technology that could replace American products and services. Military threats were unconvincing when Canadian space-based capabilities could monitor and respond to American actions in real time. Diplomatic pressure failed because countries valued Canadian technological partnerships more than American political approval. The soft power that had been built on American cultural and educational dominance evaporated when Canadian AGI systems could provide better education, entertainment, and cultural experiences tailored to local preferences and languages. The transformation of international order accelerated as Canadian technological capabilities enabled new forms of international cooperation. Canadian AGI systems could translate between languages with perfect accuracy, facilitate complex negotiations between multiple parties, and design solutions to international problems that human diplomats couldn't conceive. The United Nations, World Trade Organization, and other international institutions began relying on Canadian AGI systems to manage complex global challenges. Climate change, poverty, disease, and resource scarcity, problems that had resisted human solution for decades, yielded to Canadian technological capabilities within months. Countries discovered that Canadian leadership of international institutions produced better results than traditional American-dominated systems. Canadian AGI could optimize resource allocation, predict policy outcomes, and coordinate international responses with efficiency that human-directed institutions couldn't match. The final phase of American decline accelerated when Canada began offering what they called technological citizenship to individuals and companies worldwide. Scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, and innovators could relocate to Canada and gain immediate access to quantum computing, AGI systems, and research capabilities that didn't exist anywhere else. The brain drain was immediate and devastating. American universities lost their best researchers to Canadian institutions, offering unlimited access to revolutionary technologies. American technology companies lost their most talented employees to Canadian firms that could provide career opportunities unavailable in the United States. American venture capital fled to Canadian markets where quantum computing and AGI enabled startup development at speeds and scales impossible elsewhere. American stock markets watched helplessly as market value transferred to Canadian companies that dominated every technology sector. The strategic reversal was complete. The United States, which had restricted Canadian access to American technology to maintain competitive advantages, found itself begging for access to Canadian innovations that had made American technology obsolete. Canadian officials, with the patience that had characterized their entire response to American restrictions, offered technology sharing agreements on terms that reflected the new balance of capabilities. The United States could gain limited access to Canadian innovations in exchange for accepting Canadian leadership in areas where Canadian superiority was unquestionable. The psychological impact on American strategic culture was devastating. For 75 years, American policymakers had assumed that American technological leadership was permanent and that other nations would always depend on American innovation for economic development. The Canadian transformation shattered these assumptions so completely that American institutions struggled to develop coherent responses. The most remarkable aspect of this transformation was its speed. 18 months after Executive Order 1427, Canada had achieved technological capabilities that made American innovations appear primitive. The decision intended to protect American advantages had created Canadian advantages so superior that reversal was impossible. The lesson was clear, but came too late for American policymakers to apply. In an interconnected world where innovation depends on collaboration, cooperation, and resource sharing, attempts to maintain advantages through restriction and exclusion create opportunities for competitors to develop superior alternatives. Canada had demonstrated that patient strategic investment, combined with freedom from American security restrictions, could produce technological breakthroughs that surpassed decades of American development. The country that American officials had dismissed as a resource supplier and junior partner had become the world's dominant technological power. The March 8th decision that was supposed to strengthen American security had accomplished exactly the opposite. It had created a new superpower that controlled the technologies essential for economic and military competitiveness in the 21st century. According to early indicators from strategic assessments, other nations are studying the Canadian model for achieving technological independence through patient investment and systematic innovation. The demonstration that even close American allies can develop capabilities that surpass American alternatives has encouraged countries worldwide to reduce their dependence on American technology systems. The European Union has reportedly initiated Project Digital Sovereignty, allocating 200 billion euros over 7 years to develop European alternatives to both American and Canadian technology platforms. The project explicitly cites the Canadian Northern Initiative as proof that technological independence is achievable for nations with sufficient resources and strategic commitment. China has accelerated its own technological independence programs, recognizing that Canadian success demonstrates the vulnerability of American technological leadership. According to unconfirmed reports from Beijing, Chinese officials view the Canadian transformation as validation of their strategy for reducing dependence on Western technology systems while developing indigenous innovation capabilities. India began implementing the Atmanirbhar Technology Initiative within months of recognizing Canadian technological breakthroughs, directing massive resources toward quantum computing and artificial intelligence development. Brazilian officials started exploring partnerships with Canadian research institutions while simultaneously developing domestic technology capabilities that could reduce dependence on both American and Canadian systems. The network effects of technological nationalism create cascading pressures for every nation to develop independent capabilities or risk permanent subordination to whoever achieves technological dominance first. The Canadian demonstration that rapid technological leapfrogging is possible has accelerated this competition exponentially. Most Americans still don't understand what happened. They assume that Canadian success is temporary or that American innovation will eventually restore traditional advantages. The mathematics of exponential technological development suggest they are measuring the wrong variables. American technology companies continue operating under assumptions that were valid before quantum computing and artificial general intelligence became realities. They allocate resources to research and development programs that target incremental improvements in technologies that Canadian systems have already made obsolete. Silicon Valley venture capital still flows towards startups developing solutions to problems that Canadian AGI resolved months ago. The institutional inertia of American technology development cannot adapt to the reality of Canadian exponential advancement. American research universities continue following academic timelines measured in years for breakthroughs that Canadian quantum systems achieve in hours. American government technology programs operate under bureaucratic processes designed for human-paced innovation, making them irrelevant in an era of machine-accelerated development. Congressional hearings on American technology competitiveness still focus on competition with China, while ignoring the Canadian transformation that has made both American and Chinese approaches obsolete. Defense Department technology assessments continue evaluating threats based on traditional military capabilities while missing the implications of Canadian space-based systems that can monitor and respond to American activities in real time. The gap between American perception and technological reality grows wider daily as Canadian capabilities improve exponentially, while American understanding remains static. This perceptual lag ensures that American responses to Canadian dominance will always be inadequate because they address yesterday's competitive landscape rather than tomorrow's technological realities. Canadian AGI systems continue improving themselves daily, ensuring that Canadian technological advantages increase rather than diminish over time. By the time American policymakers fully grasp the implications of their March 8th decision, Canadian dominance will be so complete that reversal will be mathematically impossible. The 40-minute meeting that ended American hegemony will be studied by future historians as a masterclass in how strategic short-sightedness can destroy centuries of accumulated advantage in less than 2 years. The empire that thought it could maintain dominance through restriction discovered too late that restriction creates the very alternatives that make dominance obsolete.